the 7 stories course. That's what we're doing, right? And normally I've never actually taught off an existing book, but this book is a real game changer for me. It was unbelievable. So it's the whole idea behind this is really to fundamentally change how we read the Bible. So it's not just about how do we read it better. It's not just about what are some Bible study techniques that we can use, or how do we get into the Greek of a word, or what, any of that sort of stuff. Nothing wrong with any of that, but that's not really the focus of what we're doing. Yeah, this is about how do we reorient our understanding of what the Bible is doing, number one. Is it just for our spiritual satisfaction? Is it just for us to try to know God a bit better? If we talk about God being in it being inspired, there being something such as revelation, there is something that takes place when we read it. I'll just let Kirk in. Hey, Kirk. If we're looking at things like that, well, how does that operate? What is revelation? What is it actually doing when we read it, when we find something? Is it moving us somewhere? Is it transforming us? And how does that work? Right? And really it's about exploring that and getting a good grip of what it is. So the way that it does it is we're going to go over 7 different stories. Now these stories, and I'll just put up a picture here. I'll do that in a second. The idea with these stories is it's investigating not just here's a single story that's in the Bible, right? Usually when we do Bible studies, that's what we're looking at. We're zooming in on a particular passage or a particular book, right? But I can hear myself over there. Sorry, Tash. I'm doing bad enough as it is. It's just with the echo, it'll be even worse. These aren't singular stories. We're not zooming in on a particular thing. What we're actually looking at is where in the Bible have there been a progression of transformation? Like where has God actually moved people's thought, people's understanding of something from something to something else, right? And this doesn't happen in one singular book or one singular story. It's long term. And so what we'll be doing is as we go through each of these, and when I figure out how to share this, here we go. All right, you see that?
Mm-hmm.
These are the 7 stories. Okay. So it's like they're talking about something that's moving from something to something else. From oppression to justice. Story 2, violence to forgiveness, the land and its loss, wrath to compassion, victim to vindication, the temple and its deconstruction, and then history to its end. So this Bible study is huge. When we zoom in, we miss so much because it's a fun exercise. It's good to do, but we miss out the richness of what the Bible is actually doing, the whole arc, the whole story. But it's in these stories where we can understand the transformation for ourselves, right? It'll actually, that's where we discover the revelation. Because if it's not something that we can apply, if it's not something that we can actually go, this is for me, then it's just knowledge, it's just information. And that's not this is not a historical theological exercise. This is a spiritual thing. Okay. So that's the idea. The format of what that looks like is each of those stories, each of those 7 stories is broken up into 3 lessons, right? So there will be 3 different sessions. The first 2 are always in the Old Testament. And the third is always the New Testament in Jesus, because that's how each of these stories always has to end. It has to end in Jesus. Jesus is the key that unlocks everything. Have you guys seen, it's not a new movie, The Sixth Sense?
Yeah.
You have?
Yep.
Okay. Don't worry about spoilers because it's about 100 years old. But Sarah, what do you discover at the end of that movie?
Um, he was a ghost, is that right?
Yeah, he's dead.
I haven't watched it for a long time.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, Bruce Willis, the guy, is dead. He died at the very beginning of the movie. But you got no idea about that. And it was like the most mind-blowing twist ever. But it wasn't just a cool twist. What was mind-blowing about it was it changes how you view the movie. You go back and rewatch that movie, the dialogue's the same, every scene is the same, every setup is the same, but it's a different movie. You now have a knowledge, you now have an understanding, a new perspective, a new lens with which to watch this movie that changes the meaning of the movie. It changes how you view or read each scene, interactions. You go, oh, I get it now. Oh, look, yeah, they didn't respond to him. You know, they can't, he's dead. So it's like all of a sudden now you're seeing it with fresh eyes. This movie hasn't changed, but we have. That's what Jesus does in this. This is what Jesus does to all of the scriptures. And that's why each of these stories always will end in Jesus, because he fundamentally changes and will reveal something.
Yeah.
You know, it unlocks it. So that's the format. Before we get into the stories, initially there were 3 lessons on methodology. Now, when I did this last time, I did the first lesson. Tash and I had a lively discussion. She believed that I could condense all 3 into one. I said, it's impossible, but I've done it. Partly out of fear, but mostly she was absolutely right. Because I think what's important, especially for our community and for anyone who wants to take part in this, we really want to get into it. We want to get going, you know, and doing it fortnightly, it's a bit, I don't want that to drag on. All right. So what we've done is attempted the impossible, condensed the first 3 lessons into this lesson. Okay. So this is where we're at. And what that does mean is that normally these are going to be very interactive. There's going to be more space for us to be able to talk about questions, and it's a discussion. This is not a one-way lecture. Because this is more of an intensive, I'm trying to cram these 3 in. Yeah, it will still be interactive, but it might be a little bit more me, sadly for you. But that's really what we're doing. So this lesson, right? So if we understand what we're doing with 7 stories, before we get started, it's really important that we have a good hermeneutics, a good understanding, the tools that we're going to need to be able to read the Bible and understand these stories. And that is these first 3. Now, the first lesson is on the tools, the I guess like more of a biblical interpretation tools, some lenses that we use to read the Bible. The second lesson is on the atonement, theories of the atonement. And then the third lesson is on the anthropology of Rene Girard and his thought on that. They sound like 3 very disconnected things. And I actually thought so too when I first read it. But the more I thought about it, I've sort of come up with a bit of an idea as to how it all links together. So if we sit down, say, Caleb, you sit down to read the Bible, there's really 3 parties involved when it comes to doing that exercise, right? Three factors when you sit down to read the Bible that are going to affect how you understand it and what you get out of it. There is how you view the text, there is how you view God, and there is how you view yourself, right? And so if we look at this, you guys see that?
Yeah.
All right. So the lenses that we wear, there's us, there's God, and then there's the text, right? So when I talk about lenses, I mean how we approach it, how we view it, how we read it. All of those things combine in a really neat little Venn diagram to coalesce and impact the meaning we get from the text, but also how we read it. How do we approach different stories? How do we interpret certain scriptures and verses, we need to kind of cover all of this. That's what this lesson is about. We're going to look at these three things and try to get a solid understanding. All right? Does that make sense so far?
Yep, sounds good.
Excellent. Okay. So, lens one, how we read the Bible. Okay. Do any of you guys have an idea of the lens that you read the Bible with? Have you ever thought of it in that way? Have you ever thought that you have a method or an approach, or do you just wing it?
Pretty much just wing it.
That you, Kirk?
Yep. Sorry, I figured out how to use the microphone.
Mate, I'm proud of you. That's it's a big step.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you just wing it?
Yep.
Have you ever thought of oh mate, you're not alone. I think for most of us it's exactly the same. Tash said me too, but she's not as brave as you are, so she just said it to me. Oh, her mic will echo. Okay, well, look, that's really what we do. The looking at it and trying to understand all the lens that we read it through, we tend to go, well, that's for the nerds who want to go do Bible college, or the people that, want to really dig into it and take it seriously. I don't have a lens I read through. It's just a plain reading of the text. I pick it up and what it says it is. Right. Have you guys ever heard that? Has anyone ever said that? Mm. But that is a lens, right? There is no possible way that we can actually read the Bible without reading it through a lens. So even if we go, well, I don't want to complicate it. I take the plain reading of the text. That is a lens. That is we're making a choice, a decision to read it through that. Oh, Stu's here.
Hey, Stu.
Hey, mate. I'll start from scratch now that Stu's here. No, I'm joking. So it's important. That's a really key factor, okay? There is no such thing as reading the Bible without reading it through a lens. Now, that lens, even if you think it's a plain reading of the Bible, what do you think it's shaped by? Even if you've not been to Bible college and you don't have the language to use around it, can anyone suggest some things that might impact how we read it?
Okay, so if we read it, let's say it's a default reading, we open the Bible, it's shaped by the fact that it's been interpreted, so it's not the original language.
Yep.
It's shaped by our own experiences and our own, even our own interpretation and what meaning we bring to the English language can impact the way we interpret Scripture. So that's two ways.
Perfect. Yes, it's a huge thing. Yeah. Our family, what did our mum and dad, how did they read the Bible? What people we trust, our pastor, our youth leader, our parents, the people we hang out with, other than the heretics like Luke and Rich, like what have they taught us? Yeah, all of that shapes it. Do we live in China or India or Australia? We are shaped in so many factors with how we actually approach the Bible. There is no such thing as us bringing no baggage to it. We all bring our baggage to the text, all of us. So what that then means is, because we cannot get away from it, what we need to do is be conscious about it and really be intentional about, well, how do we do this? If we're going to take this seriously, how do we then make sure that the lens that we're reading the Bible through is an appropriate one? How do we take it seriously? Because we think like, I don't want to get involved in that because I'm just going to read it plainly, but there's no getting out of it. Right? So if we think this is important, we need to do the work on it. And so what this course is going to focus on is I guess, two lenses with how we approach the Bible, the text, and that's a historical critical method and a literary critical method. Now, people hear that word critical and they go, I'm out. It's the word of God. It's the Bible. How dare we be critical of it? This is why Bible college is dangerous. No. Critical just means we're not criticizing it. We're just engaging it with our brain. We're actually just taking it seriously enough to think about it as we engage it. We're doing the work on it. That's all that critical means. So I want you guys to imagine something. There is a letter between two people, right? And we're reading it 200 years in the future. Now, these two people live in a city. They are writing to each other. One of them's talking about how she's terrified of flying. The other one is scared to leave her building, and she's actually a little bit racist. She's a little bit scared of Muslims and is a little bit on edge and kind of thinks that the convenience clerk is potentially going to cause her harm. All this. They're writing to each other in a letter. They're not really explaining anything about what has happened because they're two good friends. They know the context. They're just talking to each other, right? So when we read that in 200 years' time and we're trying to figure out what's going on here, is it important to know that a month prior to that letter being written, it was 9/11 and they're living in New York City? Is that going to impact how we read that text? Massively.
Yep.
Massively. That all of a sudden it starts to make sense. The fear, the apprehension. They're not saying to each other, "Hi, Sarah, lovely day. As you recall, 1 month ago, two planes," they're not recounting events. They're just saying, "Hey, Sarah, I'm terrified. So-and-so, this happened." So in 200 years' time, without any understanding of what's going on, we need to try and figure that out. Right? So we look at it. When did this happen? Oh, this is written a month after 9/11. What was 9/11? This happened. There was this terrorist. Where is this written? In New York City. Where the attack happened. Okay. That now brings a lot more color to it. We can understand that text more. That is historical critical lens. Right? We're looking at it. Now, the other thing is, it's a letter. It's not an instruction manual. It's not a biography. It's a letter between two people. So there's probably shorthand. There are things that aren't covered. There's all sorts of stuff. So we need to read it as such. We need to understand this is the method of communication. Well, we're going to read it as such. We're not going to put expectations on this text that we shouldn't actually have to expect it to do, because we know it's a letter between two friends. That is literary critical lens, right? So they're the two that hand in hand. We need to understand the context of what's going on, and we need to understand what kind of literature it is. And if you bear with me, let me just share this again. All right. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Oops. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So there's me, not just me, that's you. And there's the Bible. We either have a plain reading. Now, the downsides of the plain reading, there's all sorts of problems. It actually doesn't help us understand the Bible at all. It's a flat reading. It's often literalistic. Not good. There's the historical and literary criticism, right? So these are the lenses that we do through. It's this side that we're going to be doing in this course, right? And now, the reason this is important specifically to the Bible is okay, let me back up 1 second. The Bible is a little bit different to what a lot of us expect it to be, right? We expect it to be this linear thing, right? Where it's kind of telling this one story, this singular point of view, So there's kind of one voice, and that's God's voice, and it goes all the way through Scripture. Even though there's different, there might be wisdom literature, there might be poetry and things like that. It's all consistent with each other all the way through. That tends to be what we think, especially when we have a plain reading of it, where we just kind of take it on face value, and that's what we're taught. But it's not the case. That's not how the Bible works at all, and that's where we run into all sorts of problems, because the Bible absolutely is inspired in the sense of there is something of God in it. It is absolutely the source of revelation. It is transformative. It is not God. It's not something that we worship, but it absolutely is it's a key fundamental part of our faith. There is something beautiful about what it does. It can be very transformative, but it is absolutely human through and through at the same time, right? It's got human fingerprints all over it. This is a collection of stories and traditions and books that were compiled and edited and written over such a long period of time. And people had to make decisions at every step of the way. What's going to go into this? What do we consider scripture and what do we don't consider scripture? What story do we drop and which one should we include? It's this collection that has been basically the opposite of dropping out of the sky, which is sometimes how we tend to treat it. Like it's like this magical thing that's and just arrived. It's not that. It's messy. In fact, it's in conversation with one another. And this is the problem when we zoom in too much. Like if we're doing a typical Bible study where we zoom in and we're just doing Mark, that's fun and that's great. But you miss the bigger picture, because if you're zoomed in, there's no tension. All you have to do is deal with that particular text. But the tension is where there's meaning. That's where we're going to be doing a lot of our work in this course. It's understanding they're in conversation with one another. There is, and because it's an intensive, I'm not going to read the scripture because we will be short on time, but there is, if you look at, who was it? Jehu's daughter, where is it? Hang on. Oh, yes. So some of the scriptures will stand in stark contrast with one another. For example, we've got sorry, I can't really find it. All right, it's gone in my notes. It was in the scripture that I chucked in the notes. I will send it through. Basically, what it is we've got Jehu, who is being slaughtered. He slaughters, I think it's Ahab's family, and it's a divinely sanctioned slaughter. Right? And that's what it says in the text. I think it's in Kings. This is the Lord's will. You need to slaughter this family. And then we see in Hosea, he's recounting the same events and absolutely critiquing it and saying, no, that was horrific. God had nothing to do with that. And we see this all the time. There is that tension. We even see it with there's in Genesis. There's two different creation accounts right next to each other, and one of them is presenting this idea of God as very intimate. He's walking in the garden alongside us, and it's like he's right there. He's calling out our name. It's this anthropomorphic idea of God. But just before that, we have this idea of God as this supreme being that just speaks all of existence into being, and it's like this majestic, transcendent idea of God. They're two very different pictures of God. Well, they came from different traditions and different backgrounds and different they're different sort of stories that someone has made the decision to combine them into and include both of them in. Yeah, and that's okay. Now, from a historical critical point of view, it's really important that we understand like a lot of the Bible is shaped based on the events around them. So the two biggest ones are Exodus and the exile, right? So them coming out of Egypt, and then particularly in terms of the formation of the Bible, them being in captivity in Babylon. And so this is where a lot of the Bible came together, because they're in Babylon. They're surrounded by obviously Babylonians. They're raising their kids in that space. Now the Babylonians have a very different understanding of how the world came to be. There's different view of God, the gods. And this is a people who their entire identity was actually in their land. It was it was with their temple. It was back where they were. That's now gone. There is no temple. There is no government. There is no land. Well, what makes you you? How do you understand your identity? How do you begin to define who you are as a people when all of the things that you did use to define who you are as a people have been taken away from you? Yeah, and this is, we see Ezekiel crying on the rivers of Babylon. This is what's going on. And so what they do, they start to go, well, we've got Israelites from the north, we've got Israelites from the south, and they've all been brought to Babylon, and they're kind of coalescing together. It's a bit of a melting pot. They're like, our kids are being taught that the way the world was created, this was the Babylonian myth, was that there was this violent struggle between all the gods, and one of the gods ended up like ripping someone in half, and that became the sky, and this became the blood became the thing, and it was like this crazy violent eruption of the world. And and then the god who was the most violent and the one that did all of that is the one who lives in Babylon, and that's the city of the king. And so they're going, this is we're slipping away here. Either our kids are going to be taught this and our identity is going to be gone, or we need to find a way to teach our kids to maintain this sense of who we are and who our God is. We know God's not like that. And so all of a sudden, Genesis starts to come together and be formed. And it's absolutely in conversation with the world around them. And that's another study for another day. But it's incredible when we understand that. It's very much a polemic. It's speaking against some of the things that they were surrounded with. And that's why there's two creation stories, because you've got people from the north and people from the south, and they both have an understanding of how God created the world, and it's the same God, and so they put it together. This is the Bible. It's messy, right? It is not a single linear piece. It's actually far more like it's a family argument at the dinner table. And they're talking to each other and they're disagreeing, and we're seeing that all through. That's what's happening. And even in that, what is the Bible? Well, if you're a Roman Catholic, you've got X amount of books. If you're Ethiopian Coptic, well, they've got extra books. If you're Greek Orthodox, if you're Protestant, Martin Luther took a bunch of books out. And so when we talk about the Bible, what are we talking about? Someone's had to make decisions. My point in all of this is collected, compiled, edited, selected over thousands of years. It's a human product. God's in it. There's revelation in it. It's inspired, all that sort of stuff. God didn't write it. It didn't drop out of the sky. And we need to understand that. Because if we don't, we're just going to pretend that inconsistencies and things like that are gone. We pretend that they're not there, or we try and justify them. And that leads to all sorts of problems, right? So a solid understanding is our first lens. This is how we are going to be reading. Does that make sense? Thanks for joining us, Neil. Interstate, huge effort.
All good. It's only 10:13 over here.
Oh, mate, you're a legend. Just further to that, we also see Jesus reinterpret scripture, which is a pretty important thing. This isn't just the Old Testament and then it all kind of came together. Like Jesus, he's the one that's going, you've heard it said this, but I say to you, da, 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 da. He will choose which bits to read at the temple and which bits to stop and to leave out. And it causes all sorts of problems. He's picking and choosing. He's understanding because he's been able to identify where is God in this. And that's what we're going to be able to do too. The end of this. So the timer just went out for that bit. So this is the first lens. Are we good with that?
Yep.
Any questions on it? No? Excellent. Okay. So move on to our second lens, right? So if you remember, first lens is how do we approach text? Well, that's how we do it. The second lens, how do we view God? Right? Because what we think of God, what we think of God's character, what is he like? And I'm going to say he just because it's easier, but look at Neil. He's not happy about it. Clearly, God has no gender. I've got no problem with someone saying she or, it's like, it's just easier to say he because I'm lazy, but I wanted to clarify that. This second lesson, the second part, this second section, lens 2, is all on atonement theories. Now, Neil, if I say atonement, what's your thoughts on that? Do you know, what would you say atonement is when we're talking about it? Not like what does it mean, but just sort of what are we talking about? What event? Give a hint.
After being on my feet all day, I don't have many thoughts. Yeah, I was thinking the cross, but I thought it has to be older than that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, spot on. It's the cross. It's that's what it is.
Yep.
It's atonement, at-one-ment. It's effectively just the word that is used for trying to figure out what happens on the cross. Clearly, something happens on the cross. What victory is it? What sort of function does the cross do? It's key, actually. It's actually really, really important for us to understand, which is why Christians for thousands of years have wrestled with trying to understand this, because the Bible is a bit ambiguous on it. There's different metaphors used and different things, but there's no clear explanation. It'd be nice if there was, but there isn't. Maybe they didn't know. They probably didn't. It's this wrestle with, like, what does it mean? How does it work? And I guess humans are wired for that, right? We love that. How does it work? What is it doing? I think it's important, like the reason that it is necessary for us to talk about is because the purpose and effect of Christ's death is crucial to Christian Bible meaning and interpretation. It absolutely colors how we read the Bible. Which is why it's the second pillar of this fundamental approach, right? This is why it's lens 2, because we need to read it and understand it in the way so that we have a good view of God. So, some traditional doctrines. There's lots. There's actually a heap of different theories and ideas around the atonement, what it means, how it works, all that sort of stuff. We're not going to cover all of them, but I do want to cover kind of 3 key ones. And the first one is probably got the coolest name, I think, definitely. And that is the devil's ransom theory, right? And look, out of the 3 that we're going to be talking about before I introduce an alternative, this is my favorite of the 3. It's the closest to what you might have heard as Christus Victor, which kind of focuses on whatever happened on the cross, it was a victory, and it was Christ's victory over the devil, right? But for the really, within the first 1,000 years of Christianity, probably from around the year 300 or 400 onwards is when this started to, people started trying to figure it out. A lot of people, well, it is a cool term, I agree. No one person came up with this that they can, trace it back to, but this idea developed that Jesus, his death was effectively used against the devil to trick the devil for releasing humanity, right? So you think about it, in this ancient world, people lived in this time of empires and slavery and kidnapping. And so ransom, like this idea of a ransom, the language was their reality. And so people look around, they see there's sin, there's all sorts of brokenness. And they're going, what's going on with this? Why is that here? And the answer they came up with was, well, really, it's clearly Satan. God's not doing this. So Satan must be in control. The devil's in control. And so that's why things are as bad as the way they are. And it's like humanity was like a slave or prisoners to Satan. That was kind of the understanding. So this idea developed that maybe the cross was really God's attempt to set us free by tricking the devil, because the devil can have people, but he can't have God. And so it's like Undercover Boss. Remember that show? It's like God kind of enters in Undercover Boss style, ends up getting crucified and killed by the devil. And it's like sucked in, surprise, I'm actually God. And you can't do that. So therefore, I've now freed everyone. Right, that was kind of the idea. You'll see analogies around like a fish, or like fishing, a fish hook, baiting Satan, all this sort of stuff. Effectively, it's a ransom payment. Jesus' death was seen as that. And so Satan takes the deal. Jesus rises from the dead, breaks Satan's power. This like this dramatic story of a rescue from the devil, which is pretty cool, right? Can anyone think of any problems with it? Who has the power? Who has a lot of power? The devil, right? Probably too much. I mean, it really presents a picture of like two equals. This dualistic, here's light and dark, God and the devil, and God can't just free his creation. He has to somehow trick the devil and still there's a transaction. He's still got to pay. There's a payment. There's still got to be a death, even if it is like to trick the devil. So it doesn't really work. It just gives Satan way too much power, right? And diminishes God's power. Now, a guy about 1,000 years later, so around 1,000, the year 1,000, a guy called Anselm had that same thought. He's like, this is, it sounds like God owes Satan something. Like God's got a bargain with Satan. That doesn't really work. He doesn't owe Satan anything. If anything, he's thinking, we're in debt to God. See, Anselm lived in Europe, and he lived in a society that was known as a feudal system. And in the system, there's kings and there's lords, knights, peasants. Honor was a big deal, right? A huge deal. Honor was everything. Honor was the currency that all of society was effectively built on in that space. So if you insulted or disrespected a king, you're cactus. This is when they would do duels, right? That they would like fight to the death and do all like the knights and all that sort of stuff over honor. It was a big deal. So if that's a big deal for kings, Anselm's thinking, well, the greatest king of all is God. Well, how much honor is due him? Right? So he's thinking the real problem is our sin, this sin that we see around us. It's got nothing to do with the devil. It's us, and we're dishonoring God's glory. And he wanted a theory that showed God's justice and honor instead of God making deals with Satan. So he replaces it with something called satisfaction theory, right? Where sin creates this huge honor debt to God, and Jesus actually pays it back on our behalf. God doesn't negotiate with Satan. God himself solves the problem. There's an issue. He's been disrespected. He's owed a payment for that. And it needs to be satisfied in the death of Jesus, right? So, because God's honor is infinite, no ordinary human action could ever actually pay that back. Yeah, that makes sense. So because the debt was so big and humans couldn't do anything about it, the only answer is he's got to enter into creation, undercover boss style again, although it's not undercover anymore. It's more just he's doing it because he's like, I got to make sure this is sorted out. It's like reconciling the books almost, right? He's got to come in and sort it out. Because we're in a debt so big that only God could do that. No human could do it. So effectively, this is what became satisfaction theory of atonement, right? Jesus' death was necessary to make things right with God in a way people of his time understood, right? Which is like in that feudal concept. Again, historical, critical perspective. We understand the world that he lived in. It makes sense he would think that way and come up with that. Are there any problems with that? I mean, there are, spoiler alert, but can anyone think of any?
Well, how can Jesus pay God? Because Jesus is God.
Yeah.
So like he's paying himself.
Yeah. Yep.
The way that I think of this one is that I get so upset. So I say that you owe me $1 million. Then I print $1 million to pay me back $1 million. It's like,
Yeah.
That's sort of what's going on. I'm like, that's just a bit weird. I make the debt and I print the currency and then pay it back to myself and it's all okay.
Yeah.
It seems a little bit weird.
And there are countries that have tried that and it doesn't work very well.
I was going to say isn't that what most of the countries are doing at the moment? They just print money and pay themselves back.
Yeah, well, yeah. And then value companies to then, offset the debt that was as all virtual. It doesn't actually exist. It's like this weird thing, right? And that's a big problem with it. Yeah, it really does. It doesn't make sense. Basically, it did at the time for them. I can understand this honor thing that they were trying to understand, but it didn't hold up. It also uses violence as a necessary part, and again, it's transactional, which we're going to come back to and talk about. It's like God can't just go, no, it's all good. There's got to be this thing. It's like, well, who's God, you or honor? Is there some concept of honor that's above God? Could he not just try on some humility and just be like, guys, it's all good. You don't have to, I don't need it. Yeah, let's just call it quits. It's just this weird thing. So that then didn't stick around. Now, about 500 years after that, a couple of blokes like that are named Martin Luther and John Calvin, they come along. They didn't do this together, but they were both influential in the development of this next, the third and final theory that we're going to be talking about. This is during a time called the Reformation, which obviously was Martin Luther breaking away from the Catholic Church. There was a big split in the church and effectively creating Protestantism. This world was very different to the world that Anselm lived in. It was no longer the feudal system. This is now no longer the world of kings and knights and peasants. This is a world in Europe of courts and judges and laws. So society is now thinking in legal terms, not honor terms. Right? So the whole concept, the whole framework had changed. The world around them had changed. Therefore, it makes sense that when they're talking and they're thinking about what's going on, well, their theory is going to change and it's going to reflect the world around them. So instead of seeing everything in terms of insulting a king's honor, well, people instead saw wrongdoing as breaking the law. And when you break the law, what do you get, Caleb? What
Punishment.
happens? What punishment? Correct. Especially back then, I think it was pretty brutal. So Luther and Calvin, they agreed with Anselm that sin was serious, and they agreed with him that it needed to be dealt with, but they completely shift the picture. So in their view, sin wasn't just dishonoring God; it actually was breaking God's law, and justice demanded not just repayment, but punishment for the crime. It needed to be retributive, and humanity. Well, if humanity is still sinning and they're looking around, sin is still there. It's stuff still going on. So they're going, okay, well, humanity actually deserves the death penalty, because again, it's God's law. This is the highest law you could possibly imagine. This is egregious to contravene God's law. But luckily, God's love provides a way out. So this is what's called penal substitutionary atonement. This is the theory of atonement that is very, very prevalent today. If you grew up in an evangelical space, this is very likely the theory of atonement that you probably were taught. It certainly was the one that I was taught. In fact, we've got a worship night coming up. I guarantee you half of the songs, if not all of them, will have lyrics that in some way relate to substitutionary atonement, penal substitutionary atonement, like this idea that God took the wrath instead of us. He paid the price by his blood.
I hope the songs won't have that in it.
I guarantee you they will, but it's hard to find any that don't,
But yeah, that's been my problem over the last 3 Easters, trying to find an Easter song that doesn't have that in it. It's impossible.
It's really hard. It really is hard. And good on you for trying. We just stick with oceans, right? It's theologically, I actually haven't checked the lyrics, but it's good enough that it'll account for any errors there. So penal substitutionary atonement, or the cool kids would call it PSA. Penal means punishment. Substitutionary means someone takes your place. So Luther and Calvin taught that Jesus actually took our punishment as a substitute, like stepping into a courtroom and saying, "I'm going to take the sentence for them. They're guilty. They did it, but I'm taking it for them." Or there's a bus coming and Jesus steps in front of it and he's like, "I'm going to cop this, even though you guys deserve this bus," right? On the cross, Jesus bears the penalty for our sins so we could go free, forgiven, and declared innocent. So, the difference with Anselm said sin dishonored God, so Jesus restored God's honor. Luther and Calvin say sin broke God's law, so Jesus takes the punishment that we require. Now, can anyone think of anything that's wrong with this? And there's a lot.
It's also quite transactional.
Spot on. Absolutely, it's transactional. Yeah. I mean, a good question is like, why? Hey, Leon. Like, why does God need this? So, because in this instance, it's not Satan and it's not humans. This is God. It is God's wrath. God's the one delivering it. So it's like God's like an old Italian mother with a shoe ready to belt someone because someone's got to get it. And it's like, it's like God saying, "Sorry, guys, someone has to get it." So there's got to be punishment, and it's got to be people, because it's people that are doing it. But it's like then Jesus kind of steps in and goes, I'll wear it. And God's like, okay. But Jesus and God are they are God. Like, Jesus is God. So it's like God goes, I better step in and sort this out so that I meet this condition of justice by meting out this punishment. But again, what's this God of justice? Why does justice sit above God? Why is God answering to this sense of justice? Is God God or is justice God? Why could God just not go, it's all good? Maybe call it like grace or something and just say, it's freely given, which is another problem. How do you define forgiveness? Rich, if I ask you to define what forgiveness is.
Yeah. It's just something I give to the other party without.
So if you owe me $20.
Yeah. I just say, I forgive you that. You don't owe me the $20 anymore.
Yes. Now, is it forgiveness? If I owe you the $20 and you go,
somebody better
belt Caleb. I'm going to belt Caleb half to death, and that will satisfy it. And Luke, you're forgiven. I'm not forgiven anything. A payment was paid. Something had to happen. So where's the forgiveness?
Yeah.
What was nothing was forgiven. There was a payment. If there's a payment, a debt was cleared. So which one is it? Are we forgiven or are our debts paid? And if they were paid, why did they need to be? And where, like, so all of this starts to really become difficult. And also, how's God look in this picture? If Jesus is God's son, and the Bible's speaks out pretty hardcore against child sacrifice.
This looks like child sacrifice.
Except for this is like cosmic child abuse, but it's okay because why? Yeah, it's like, and also, again, there's lots of things wrong with it, but this paints out like God is terrifying. He's angry. He's violent. I like Jesus. Jesus is my homeboy. He kind of got between me and the old man upstairs, and you know he's good, but his dad's terrifying. Well, that's terrible theology. So
that is actually a heresy.
It is a heresy.
It's not just somebody saying heresy because they don't like it, but it's a defined heresy in the church to say that Jesus is not God.
Well, that's right.
It does, yeah.
100%. So, and yet, in 5 minutes between us, we've just picked some pretty glaring holes in that. And look, I'm not judging. This was the Middle Ages, and the world they lived in and that stuff. But it's time for us to let it go and to think of a better way. And yet we haven't. Why is this still the predominant understanding of the cross? And it's so contradictory because we'll sing songs about this and we'll preach this. And especially in the Calvinist circles, they go real hard on it. They lean right in. And yet, but then we'll do a message on the Sermon on the Mount, and we'll talk about Jesus and the woman who was being stoned and forgiveness and grace and So it's like we've got a good handle on this sort of stuff, and yet we see no contradiction with how we view the cross. And do you know what that gives us? An escape clause, so that when we are reading the Old Testament and we read about Sodom and Gomorrah and there's fire and brimstone rain down, we go, oh, cool. That's that God. Yep. Remember the wrath, the justice. Cool. I'm okay with that. That's all just. Oh yeah. Go and destroy the Amalekites. Yep. I'm okay with that. They must have been bad people. God's pretty hardcore. Or the one that I struggled with a lot, the poor bloke who was carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and the guy in front of him trips over, and all he does is put his hand out to stop it from falling over. And then God strikes him dead for breaching the holiness. And well, if our view of God is that he can do what he did to his own son, not just out of necessity, some weird necessity, but relishing the punishment side of it, making it painful, making it horrific. I mean, that's a God who would probably strike someone down for touching the side of the Ark of the Covenant. Like, we can reconcile these things, but we shouldn't be able to reconcile these things, because if we can't imagine Jesus doing it, we shouldn't be able to imagine God doing it, which is why we need to have a better way of looking at the cross. And that's why the cross is so important, because there's no point us going through and reading the Bible if that's how we view God. It's really important, which is why this was the second lens. All right, I've got a couple of minutes to wrap up this second part. A couple of things that I want to mention. All three of these theories is underpinned, they're transactional, as Caleb pointed out. So all of them, the only way they work is if there's some sort of transaction. And all of them require violence. So I'm just going to share my screen. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
So these transactional atonement views, devil's ransom, well, there's violence against evil, where God is weaponizing violence, undercover boss style, to trick the devil, right, and free humanity. It's a good story. It's the best out of the three. It does speak to a cosmic victory, which I believe occurs, and all that sort of stuff. But violence and transactional still are the driving force behind it. Anselm satisfaction, violence repays honor. It's still a violent transaction in order to repay God's honor. Penal substitution, well, it's almost like sadistic violence in punishment. So it's not just someone needed to die, it's someone's got to pay. And that's what we deserve, right? And thankfully, Jesus did that on our behalf. So violence is the driving force underneath all of these models. It's transactional, so either God or Satan gets paid in blood. Good question. So Tash just said, what's the alternative point of view? Which is important. But I don't know. So we'll move on. No, I do. I do. The alternative point of view is we need to look at the cross and understand it not as something that requires violence, but as something that exposes violence.
Mm.
That is actually non-violent, which is a weird thing to try to get our heads around, right? So this is like one of the most violent events in history. It's truly, truly horrific. It's kind of like the peak of violence. And how are we to understand God's role in that if God is non-violent? What's the function of it? And so that's we need to look at this is what we're about to kind of the journey we're going to go on is going to uncover. The Bible doesn't actually reveal a God who needs violence, but a human race that is trapped in violence. All right. And in our third lens that we're about to cover, you'll understand that much better. But the cross shows that it's us and not God that actually demand sacrifice. And God's response is actually not more violence, but forgiveness and resurrection. And what that does is it breaks the cycle. That's the transformative thing. You got Jesus up there. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. And yet somehow we are to think his dad's up there relishing the sacrifice for himself of his own. Like, no, that is the picture of God. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. You know, God is the one who puts the ear back on the centurion who is actually arresting Jesus. God is the one who has all the power to call down legions of angels. And he even says it. Oh, of course I could do that. And yet chooses not to. That's God. And that's not a theory. That's what we know. And so that's what we use to say, well, if that's God, we need to understand the cross in a different way. And that's this way. It's a non-violent atonement. It's not transactional, it's relational. So violence is exposed, it's actually stripped of its power. So instead of it being a divine transaction, what if the cross actually unmasks the lie that God is violent and demands blood, the way religion and politics justify killing for peace, humanity's scapegoating reflex, which we'll get into in a little bit. And in fact, Jesus' resurrection is God's emphatic no to the entire system. It's his vindication, his exclamation mark on the fact that this was, that he was in Jesus. Do you know what I mean? It's like Jesus' non-violent resistance. It's a God who would rather go to the cross and be murdered by his own creation than retaliate in violence and further perpetuate the cycle that we're trapped in. And in doing so, he actually frees us. He doesn't return with vengeance when Jesus is resurrected. In fact, the first words out of his mouth is, peace be with you. Peace be, I come in peace. I come in peace. It's like, bet you thought I'd come guns blazing, but I'll come in peace. He offers peace to the very people who killed him. God's forgiveness comes before repentance without payment because that's who God is. So why does this matter? Well, in the traditional models, the violence is sacred. Violence is wrapped up with God. It becomes a necessary part of salvation. That's really important. Salvation is linked, and the gospel becomes linked with this. The gospel's got nothing to do with penal substitutionary atonement or blood being paid. That's not the gospel. And yet I've heard it preached as such because we get so confused, it gets so convoluted. So violence is actually exposed and emptied of power. The cross is not God changing his mind about us, satisfying his wrath or accepting his payment. It's God changing our minds about him. It's showing that God is not the one that's demanding blood. Salvation is not a legal or honor deal. It's liberation from the very system of sin and death that says someone has to die for peace. So instead of seeing the cross as a heavenly courtroom or a ransom exchange, effectively, we think of it through, we crucified God to actually defend our system of power. God let us do it. He absorbed it. He forgave us, and he rose again. And in doing so, he breaks the whole cycle of sacred violence. So the cross is not divine violence saving us. It's divine love exposing our violence and offering a new way to be human. That's really key. That last bit, it offers a new way to be human. This is the kingdom. This is the new creation. All right? That's why atonement matters. How we view and how we understand this matters. Does that make sense?
That's so good.
You can see why there was usually a lesson for each of these. And I do feel bad but I'm giving us enough for us. And in the notes, there'll be resources that you can deep dive. I'm always available to go deeper on this offline, but I'm giving us enough to be able to progress onto the stories, but we're scratching the surface here.
So good.
Sorry, Rich, I cut you off.
I was just going to say, one of the things that helped me when I was wrestling with this is when you're looking at the whole story of the cross, is asking one question is like, in that whole story, if you could point to a place and say, that's where God is, where is God? Where are you pointing? Because the other theories, you have to point at the person holding the whip or the person driving the nails or the person beating him to a bloody pulp. That's God right there. The only way that you can, really point to is God's on the cross saying, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And if you can't point there, I think you've missed the whole point of the story. If you're pointing in both places, then you've just turned it into some sort of mockery of a play where God's playing all the parts and we're just sort of being manipulated. But if you can't point to Jesus and say that's where God is,
Yep.
I think you've got major problems of how you're reading the whole story. And as soon as I asked that question of myself, I was like, oh, it's obvious the only way to read that story is I have to point at Jesus, then everything else has to fall in line behind that. And suddenly it made it a lot easier to wrestle with the questions. It's like, okay, I can settle on that. I'll figure out the questions later. And they do. They, with these sort of theories and the non-violent atonement, becomes a lot easier to get your head around.
Massive. It's massive. And I'll give you an example of how it shapes how we read it. So if we have a view of penal substitutionary atonement, when we read a verse of like Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's talking about, Father, if only this cup of wrath could be passed from me, but instead I'll drink from it. Well, how are we going to read that? Well, he wishes that he didn't have to, but God demands a sacrifice. God's wrath must be poured out. And Jesus is the only one that can do it. He wishes he didn't have to, but he's got to drink from the cup of wrath. But when we understand this, again, like Bruce Willis, end of Sixth Sense, it starts to change things. And now we go, that same verse, it's a cup of wrath that we are making him drink.
Yeah.
We poured it. We're offering it up. God wishes that it didn't get to this. But he knows that the only way to break this cycle, and as we're about to learn, it's a cycle that has gone from the foundation of humanity and civilization. The only way to do it is for him to absorb it, for him to take it. Because he is truly innocent. And then he takes it and he doesn't come back with a vengeance. He takes it and he forgives. It's like he takes everything, the worst that humanity can throw at him, and still forgives. And doesn't even bring it up. Does not even bring it up. It'd be the first thing I would say when I rose from the dead. I'd be like, where's Peter? Mate, seriously? 3 times you did that? Like, what is going on? He doesn't bring it up. It's just, this is a different God. This is a God. That's why it's transformative. So now, I know we're supposed to finish in 10 minutes. Do you reckon, and I'm asking mostly Caleb and Neil, do you reckon it's okay if we go 10 minutes over just to finish off this last bit?
It won't be 10 minutes though. I just know that we'll keep going because
It will be. It will. But feel free if you got to leave, because it is recorded. So you can just grab the next bit. So anyone who needs to jump off is totally okay. I knew that we would be pushing it, obviously, with the condensing the 3. But
yeah, covering a lot.
This third lens, right? This third thing is, how do we view us? So we've covered how do we approach the text, the lens that we need to have when we're reading that. We've covered now, just with the atonement stuff, how do we look at the lens that we need to be wearing when we're looking at God, right? The third one is the lens that we need to have, that we look at us. How do we think of not just us as individuals, but humanity, right? So that's really, really important. And to do that, we're going to be looking at the work of René Girard. Now, some of you you've probably heard me. I'm very much a fanboy of René Girard. Again, this could be like 10 lessons to just start to cover it. He's written books and books and books. This is going to be a very, very short overview to try and understand it. But again, there'll be more resources to try and get our head around. But René Girard, he has this theory, this understanding. He has effectively come up with a framework of understanding human culture, which is anthropology, right? That the study of society, human culture, humanity, that unlocks what we need to understand about who we are, and actually interplays with the Bible in the most phenomenal way. It actually, this is the single thing that transformed how I read the Bible and the stories within it. This is your Bruce Willis Sixth Sense moment for a lot of this. He was a French guy. He was a master of a whole bunch of different things. He was a French anthropologist and literary professor and theologian, and he was just brilliant at all these different areas. And because he was so good at that, he wasn't really accepted when he was alive in any of the areas, because they were like, oh, you're doing all this other stuff. But he was very much a genius. He passed away in 2015, and so not very long ago. And his work is continuing to be transformative, right? People are discovering it all the time. It's becoming a really, really influential body of work and thought framework. So what we need to understand, here's his core ideas, right? The very first thing he stumbled across, right, and we're going to do it in order, is this idea called mimesis. So many years ago, earlier on in his career, he's discovered that humans are effectively like mirrors, right? So our desire, we think our desire is our own. Yeah, we think that I want something because I want it. But I don't want that car because I want it. I want it because I saw an ad that David Beckham was driving that car, and he looked really cool, and so I want that, or whatever it is. The desire that we think is our own is actually not. It really never is. It's always mirrored. So we desire what others desire, and he calls this mimesis. Right? It's a mimetic desire. This has happened, it's fundamental to who we are. This is why if you put two babies in a crib and there's a whole bunch of toys there, one of them's playing with the toys, the other one's going to go straight for the toy that he's playing with. It's not because that toy is any better than the others. It's because he desires it because the other baby desires it. All right? That's unlearned. That's part of who we are. Now, what happens when that occurs? What do you reckon is going to happen if Caleb and I, thousands of years ago, we both want the same cave woman, and we're in one cave? What's going to happen? We're going to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Tash yelled out, fight. It's going to get violent. Because guess what? I say, I desire that because I desire it. And Caleb says, I desire her because I desire her. We don't think that anything to do with one another. So my desire matters more, his desire matters more, and so we're in conflict, right? This is inevitably, this is what is always going to happen. It becomes the thing that we desire becomes special because we recognize someone else wants it. Now, this imitation is not always bad. In fact, it's really important. This is exactly how we learn and grow. This is how kids understand how to talk. This is how they learn how to walk. We just copy. We are machines that just copy what we see around us, and it's really helpful. But it has a dark side, and that dark side is it fuels jealousy, rivalry, and violence. Now, this predates human civilization. This is like early humans. If they're constantly doing that and they're ending up in a rivalry, what's going to happen to the species? The cactus. Humans, it's not going to work. We're just going to kill each other. And we'll end up, it just won't work. So humanity figured out subconsciously how to avoid doing that. There's got to be a solution. How do we overcome this thing, right? So this violence, which is what it always results in, Gerard defines violence like not just as physical harm, but any cycle of rivalry, blame, and exclusion that escalates. So I'm going to say that again, it's really important. Violence is not just something that we do. Sometimes we lump it in with like shoplifting and swearing or whatever. It's like, oh, it's just something that we do. It's not really good, but So no. This is a force of its own. This is something far greater than that. It's not just physical harm, but any cycle of rivalry, blame, and exclusion that escalates. and it always escalates. It's like a virus. So he realized that like a virus, violence spreads very, very quickly. So in that cave, when Caleb and I are fighting over cave woman Sarah or cave woman Tash, that violence actually spreads to all the other cavemen in that cave, right? Or the other tribe people. All of a sudden, one fight starts, others join in. Soon the whole community is at risk of chaos. And it's what would happen. These communities would just start to devolve. This is what he calls a mimetic crisis, when everyone's copying each other's anger and society is on the edge of collapse. Right? It's just all going to hell. So what is the mechanism that we came up with to stop this? Well, ancient communities found a brutal way to stop this chaos. They would pick one person in the group, and it's usually an outsider, someone that's different, someone that's powerless, someone that was disabled, or someone that just stood out. And they become the one that is responsible for everything, because no one has any understanding of why everyone's fighting, of why things are just devolving into chaos. They're looking for a solution, and the solution happens to be Bob over there, gimpy leg Bob. It's his fault, right? And so all of a sudden, the whole group channels their violence, channels their rivalry into a single individual, an outsider. And they blame them for everything wrong, and they would kill them, or they would drive them out and get rid of them. What do you think happens then to the community once that person is dead or driven out? In that instant, in that moment, Tasha said, order is restored. There is a peace. Was Gimpy Leg Bob the problem? No. But his death or his expulsion brings calm, it brings peace, and it brings order. And so what's the community going to think? We were right. He absolutely was the problem. If he wasn't the problem, we'd still all be fighting, but we're not. We're unified. We took care of it. And that is a really important thing to remember. So the sacrifice seems to restore peace because everyone unites in blaming the scapegoat instead of fighting with each other. That person becomes the founding victim. Their death becomes the foundation of society's order. Right? So this is kind of what would happen. And of course, peace is restored, but because the outsider wasn't the problem, the scapegoat was not the issue, what's going to end up happening? Chaos again. Violence is going to spread. It's just going to build up, build up, build up until we do it again. And we build up and then we do it again. So over time, we're talking thousands and thousands of years, people feared violence returning. So they built rules and taboos, prohibitions to prevent the chaos. So they identified, well, we need to stop this violence from happening before it actually happens. They then create rituals of sacrifice to keep the gods happy, not realizing the god was actually their own fear of violence, right? So they understood that when we do this thing, peace is restored. So why don't we just do it in advance? Let's not wait for things to get out of control and to then have to find a scapegoat. We will then let's just make a ritual so that every year we'll put all of our stuff onto this one goat or this one individual or whatever. And it's a human sacrifice. You've got the Aztecs or child sacrifice, all of this sort of stuff. It's like we need to find something we can channel this into for the good of the community. This was the idea. This is how religion was born. This is what Gerard posits. Religion actually predates society, predates civilization. We always thought that it came after. We built cities, we became civilized, and then we decided that we should worship the gods, and we figured out religion. He says that no. Actually, it predates civilization. This idea of ritual, of sacrifice is something that was embedded in us. And so ancient myths basically they always tell these stories from the crowd's point of view. the scapegoat always looks guilty and the community is always justified in what they do. That's really important. And so his idea is that all these myths in all these different cultures and religions, they all have mythology around the origin of something. Like, look at Rome. Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, and there was a battle and one brother killed the other, and Rome was built on the body of the dead brother. Like, there are so many of them, and this is what he stumbled across. It's all over the world, but it all points back to like a single event, and then over time it becomes mythologized and becomes a story that tells the truth but also masks it. So the truth is in there about something that happened, but it's presented in a way that is, the scapegoat actually was guilty. The crowd was justified, because it only works if you believe that. It doesn't work if you don't think they're guilty. That's the only way it works. You have to believe that that guy's the problem or that people group is the problem. That's the only way it works. Because you have to believe that when they leave, that they were the cause, and that's what the peace is. And it just keeps perpetuating this cycle. So here's the thing. He'd come up with all of this sort of idea, and then he goes to read the Bible. And he approached the Bible thinking this is just going to be another religion, and they're going to be telling the same stories, and it's always going to be siding with the crowd, and it's going to be the same thing, but he wanted to study it. And he was blown away with what he found. He said that it was absolutely revolutionary, because what the Bible does and nothing else did, the Bible sides with the victim. Look at Genesis. You got Abel. Abel is murdered by Cain, and it says that Abel's blood cries out from the ground and that God hears his cry. It's just like, whoa, all of a sudden there's this siding with the victim. You've got Joseph. Look at Job. So many of the prophets. There are endless stories, which we're going to also get into in the coming weeks, of the victim and the voice of the victim, and the Bible presenting something and critiquing the violence that is happening against it, leading to the ultimate innocent victim in Jesus. And we see that mimetic crisis happening up the cross. We see the chaos. It devolves. He stood alone. His disciples abandoned him. Look, even Peter gets caught up in the power of the crowd. You got the crowd who was chanting Hosanna days prior, all of a sudden now chanting to release Barabbas. Like, this is mimetic contagion. This is what happens. It's the mob mentality. It's looking for a scapegoat, of which Jesus was. So the Bible shows that scapegoats are innocent, and the violence comes from humans, not God. Now, there are lots of stories in the Bible that are presented in a way that it seems the other way around, and that's important for us. We're going to look at those. But in Jesus, we see the ultimate forgiving victim. He's unjustly killed, but instead of revenge, he offers forgiveness, breaking the cycle of violence. So that's it in a nutshell. There's a lot more to Girard, but why does exposing the scapegoat mechanism matter? Well, once we see that violence and scapegoating are actually human inventions and not divine justice, which is key, well, the spell is broken. This is why when Jesus dies on the cross and he hasn't lifted a finger in anger and is pleading for the Romans' forgiveness as he's dying, you've got a Roman centurion at the foot of the cross saying, wow, surely this was the Son of God. It's like this instant realization, he did not deserve this. He was truly innocent. And what does that do? Well, if you think the scapegoat is innocent and this was an unjust event, it falls apart. The whole mechanism, the peace through violence, peace through force, it falls apart. All of the disciples felt it. Everyone felt it. They just knew. It undid it. And because when we know this, it makes it harder to unite against an innocent victim because we see what's really happening. This is why Girard thought Jesus' death was world-changing, because it reveals the truth about violence and it offers a way out through mercy and not revenge. Now, why is this relevant today? Well, violence is bad because it's self-reinforcing. And I get self-conscious because I'm always talking about violence and God being non-violent. And sometimes people are just like, that's like a side note. Why does it matter? Why is this so important to you? This is why. It's not a side note. For me, this is a fundamental part of what it is to follow Jesus and to understand who God is. Violence is a force. It's a generative force. Violence is what actually built culture, civilization, which doesn't sound like a bad thing. But when all of humanity is built on this, we're going to project that onto God. We're going to project that onto each other. Is it any wonder why there's war after war? We're seeing it every day. It's self-reinforcing. Blame creates blame. Revenge creates revenge. And it's interesting that Satan is called the accuser. It's like the blame, the father of blame. We still scapegoat. Think of bullying, online shaming, politics, blaming minorities. We're seeing that everywhere. Family fights. So without awareness, societies fall back into these ancient patterns. It looks different. We're not sacrificing children on altars anymore. Of course it looks different, but it happens. This stuff happens all the time.
Yeah.
Look at Alligator Alcatraz over in America. Who's the problem that all of the United States problems are blamed on? Is immigrants, illegal immigrants in theory. If we just got rid of them, everything would be okay. Really? What about Salem witch trials? If we just kill these women, they're the problem. The Crusades, it's just endless. It is endless. So without awareness, we're going to fall back into these patterns. So this theory matters because it shows how to break cycles of hate, how to choose forgiveness, empathy, and solidarity with victims. They're practical things that we demonstrate as a new creation. This is not theory. This is not some sort of theological footnote. This is like, I want to follow Jesus. Is there more to it than turning up on a Sunday and reading my Bible every now and then and having someone pray over me in tongues and getting, like, all of that stuff is cool. But if we feel trapped, like we're not actually doing anything, and sure, we might swear less, or, you know, there might be some weird little thing that shows that we are changing, but you don't feel fundamentally changed the way the Bible talks about it. This whole new creation, like a new reality. Or when we look at how to do this, this is transformative. Because we break cycles of hate and violence in our families, in our relationships, in our politics, in our society at large. We choose forgiveness, empathy, and solidarity with victims. These are not just fruits of the Spirit or things that we should do because we're nice, because we follow Jesus. No. This is like living in a transformative way that actually is fundamentally different and speaks to a reality that stands in stark contrast to the world around us, because we look around and we still see this stuff going on all the time. All the time. Okay, Tash saying I've got to let everyone go. And I will. The last bit is, yeah, no, that's it. I'll send through notes. Oh, just lastly, we see this in geopolitics. We see this in cancel culture.
I was going to say, we see this in the news a lot, right?
Yes.
Any sort of story where there's there's a housing crisis at the moment in Australia. Who's to blame? Oh, it's too much immigration. Oh,
Yeah.
there's not enough. There's always someone to blame, right?
Has to be.
And that's how the news cycle always sort of like gears you toward. It's always like, okay, we need to get to the bottom of this problem. So whose fault is it?
All that is a bunch of tribes people bickering in mimetic rivalry and looking to channel that into something that makes sense.
Yeah.
It must be the immigrants. Yeah. And talk about mimetic desire. I mean, remember COVID with the toilet paper?
Mm.
Why did we all want toilet paper? We didn't, it didn't make sense, but we needed it. You know, and things got violent in the bloody aisles. We see this.
Yeah.
This is not some ancient thing that used to happen. It just looks different today. And that's why this is such a powerful framework and understanding of humanity, because it's here. Sorry, Leon.
I was saying, isn't it why like nations are often the most united when there's a huge enemy? Like take America, like when Russia was really the enemy, or like or communism, where it was a huge force that they had to unite against. And now because everything is a bit more fragmented and there's no real big enemy that's like turning against each other. That whole nomadic thing you're talking about, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
What happened after 9/11?
Right, yeah, the terrorists. Yeah.
It wasn't this small, fundamentalist, extremist, terrorist offshoot. It was Muslims, full stop.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Because we need to blame someone. We need to make sense.
Yeah.
And nothing unites like finding someone to blame. That's how Trump is actually in office. He's just very good at articulating and pointing out, oh, no, we blame this people. And the church does it.
Yeah, exactly. So the church does it the most, right? Us and them, inside and out. Believers, non-believers.
There's an attack on family values. Everything would be all good if gay people didn't exist, because they're the ones that are undermining society. So seriously, we need to put a face to it. We need a victim. And this is, so it happens. But also the inverse happens as well. The power of what Jesus did on the cross, I see that in the civil rights movement. What exposed and broke the back of Martin Luther King Jr. and what was happening there with the civil rights movement, the march across Selma. It wasn't firebombing police stations and trying to get back at them, in this sense of retaliation. It was the imagery that went around the world of a peaceful march across a bridge and police officers on horseback beating them, and they weren't lifting a finger in response. It was this non-violent, it was absolutely resistance, but it was non-violent. And what it did was it exposed the violence, it exposed it for what it actually was. And that's what tore everything apart. South Africa, their Truth and Reconciliation Commission after apartheid, instead of a violent revenge after apartheid, the nation attempted forgiveness and truth-telling. That's a real-life echo of Jesus's forgiveness, breaking cycles and cycles of vengeance. We see it when people, I remember seeing a video of a guy whose daughter was brutally murdered by someone. And he stood up in court and said, I absolutely forgive you. It's just like this insane forgiveness. It's just, this is not eye for an eye. This is not, I'm going to shoot you down in this courtroom. And this is way more powerful than that. That achieves nothing. But forgiveness, that echoes around the world. And this is what we are called to be. In wrapping all of this up, this is the framework we're going to use to read these stories, because if we approach it like this teaches us about us, humanity, our who we are. When we're reading the Bible, we can see where is God and where is us. Where are we seeing these things occur in these stories? And there's so many of them. So many of them. It's actually awesome. Read the book of Job. That's like scapegoating 101. We're going to cover a lot. But once we understand God is good and non-violent, we understand the role he plays in this. When we understand how we are, we understand what this is teaching us about us. And we're reading the text through the proper lens. So we've got all three covered. which sets us in good stead for these coming stories, which is just $99 per month. It's cheap as chips. Got a taste. No, I'm joking. So fortnightly, Thursday nights. And this will be it. It'll be, again, less dense. That was a lot. I understand it was. There's going to be some unbelievable notes and everything. Kirk reckons it's a bargain. You know why they're unbelievable? It's because I'm not actually doing them. Zoom's AI is going to do a nice summary of everything. And I've got other, I'll send all the graphs and charts and even some dictionary of some of these terms. Tasha's looking at me going, wrap this up. I am. Important terms we've discussed. So don't feel overwhelmed with everything we've done. You're going to be resourced and equipped with stuff. But I think it's going to be good.
Helen's been doing some notes while you've been talking.
Oh, nice. Tash said she hopes it's a graphic. Oh, it is. Yes. So our time is up, but does anyone have any questions, any concerns, any closing thoughts? And anyone who has to leave, feel free to. I think Neil's asleep. It's like 3 a.m. in Sydney. There's a lot to digest. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
Well, it was really good. Thanks so much, Luke.
Thanks, Luke.
Yeah, thanks, Luke. It's so good.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you for all your time.
Yeah, this was a good session, man.
I didn't think I'd be able to. Did I accept that, Caleb?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, so it's a lot, but I think they all link together. Does it? I guess my main thing is, does it all make sense how it fits in? Why we had to kind of do that? Oh, look at this. Oh, CT. You seen this, Tash?
So we talked about how certain stories is this journey of transformation. That's the outline of what we're going to do. But you basically put it down to 3: how we read the text, how do we view God, and how do we view us. So there's this whole cycle of violence, there's the scapegoating, and then it brings peace for now, but it keeps repeating.
Wow.
And so there's all that's
I like your goat. The
lesson.
goat's pretty like a puppy goat.
That is amazing.
Yeah, it's an interesting goat.
I actually don't know how to draw a goat.
It's like a pig with
It's
horns.
a pig with horns.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's awesome. Mate, that's incredible. How will we get access to that? Because I'd love to include that in the notes that are.
You got to pay me $99.
I'll just give it to you for free, and you just this is transactional. This is like
this is penal substitution.
graphic substitutionary atonement.
I'll just email it to you.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate you guys spending the time. And I know we've gone 20 minutes over, but we started 10 minutes late, so I'm kind of like, it was not too bad to condense all of that in. It burned me the amount of stuff I had to leave out, but I think we covered all the important stuff.
You did very well.
Yeah, it was really good. How do we access the recording?
Good question. No, I'm going to put it up on the Bible Out of Bounds. Oh, I guess I should ask permission if that's cool with you guys. I'll just chuck it. I can make it private if people think it's an issue, but otherwise, I'll chuck it up there, and then I'll be able to send around and say, for anyone who's joining us, just go watch this. It's pretty important, and then have all of the notes and everything available with it as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. That was awesome.
Thanks so much.
Oh, damn, I didn't know you were there. You snuck in.
I'm always there.
She's been here all along.
I'm always watching.
Yeah.
omnipresent, they say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just like God.
Yes.
Yeah.
Humble as well.
Kirk's experienced the wrath of Tam.
Just
Violent.
Yeah. Oh, guys, no, I really do
Oh, it's
appreciate it.
so good. Really enjoyable.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Can't wait for the stories to start now.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to be very, very awesome. Yeah, I'm excited. And what I'll do is I'll give you a preview of everything in the coming. So I'll do up the event for next Thursday now, so that it's not 48 hours before, and so that it's all up and it's ready and it can be in the diary. And I'll tell you what we're doing and what Bible stuff you need to be reading.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thanks,
Brilliant.
legends. Love you all.
All right. Thanks again.
And thanks, Caleb. That's the
Thanks,
insane.
man.
It's
Thanks.
awesome.
Right, guys. We'll see you Saturday.
Yes.
All right.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night, guys.
See you guys.
Love you. Bye.